Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories. Helmut, I was reflecting once again on storytelling and how it's so underappreciated in our lives. That same skill that we developed initially as children when we were thinking about how to escape the wrath of our parents. There was one occasion I tried to persuade my parents that the cat was the one that ate the pancake mix, even though the pancake mix was in the fridge. I think I was quite inventive with how I came up with that story, but in a way it sort of teased this whole notion of how storytelling is a part of our lives, whether or not we use it for good, or as I attempted to do at the cat's expense, for evil. Here's another cool nugget. When we hear a story, our brains light up like a Christmas tree. This is what the neurologists talk about. They talk about the sensory cortex and the emotional centers of the brain. They wire you up sometimes when they're telling stories, and they can see how it's triggering different aspects of the brain. All too often in corporate life, I tend to think that we kind of fall asleep a little bit in some of the meetings that just drone on, and then someone tells a story, or you hear someone relay a story about how Steve Jobs was marketing the iPod as 1,000 songs in your pocket, and suddenly it resonates. It has a different level of meaning. So I don't know whether or not, Helmut, you think also about storytelling the same way. Have you been thinking about it since our last episode?
I always think about storytelling, and I was just smiling a bit when you said when I was a child. I think you still have many, many childlike qualities, which makes you so endearing, and your storytelling is still amazing. And for those who basically have not listened to us before, David and I used to work together, and I always admired his ability to tell stories. But on a more serious note, I think storytelling is for me so important because it really evokes emotions. And I think whether it be business, private life, emotions are the backbone of great things to happen.
Thank you. Back into this particular episode, and we're very happy to have a guest with us today, Mr. Peter Tauchner-Hoover. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction here, but we're going to do it a bit differently to how the previous episodes have gone. I think we're going to do some true or false. I was thinking, is it true, false, or do you want to plead the fifth? I think in a way, perhaps we give you that third option. First off, an easy one. This is an easy one.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, so I thought I'd
see
throw
if it's
that in
needed.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah, see if it's needed.
It
So first of
will
all,
be needed, promise you.
this is, well, he's giving it away a little bit here. First of all, you're Austrian, correct?
correct.
Yeah, see, that was easy. So this is just so that I can get the lie detector to work, because they have to ask a couple of... I understand you spent hours in front of screens observing share price movements with your grandfather in your youth, and that may have shaped what you did later in life. Is this true?
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. This was one of the things I think you relayed in the story. Peter, for those of you listening to the podcast, Peter features in our third book, Artificial Death of a Career, and his story about how his youth and his grandfather shaped his future career features in the book. Now, here's another one. You played NCAA level tennis in the US.
That is correct.
And you were ranked at one stage, because I know I found something on the internet suggesting that you got to some heady height of ranking. Is this true?
Not in the college tennis rankings, but I played international youth tournaments and stuff like this before, where
Okay.
I had international rankings and stuff like.
So here we go. We got Austrian by birth, grandfather shaping you in the world of finance, a competitive tennis player. I also understand you're something of a poker player. Is this true?
Yes, that's also true. I mean, the competitive nature always kind of appealed to a lot of the sports people, to be honest.
Yeah. It's also about risk, isn't it? Managing risk. I think poker is played by a lot of financial traders.
So
I found a peer-reviewed article at Mercer University on the speculation versus fundamentals of spot markets in refined petroleum products, which sounds a bit of a mouthful, but your name seemed to be attached to that. So something of an academic, or?
yeah, I wouldn't say too much of an academic, but that was basically a project that was done my senior year together with a professor. He was obviously in the lead there, but I did a fair bit of the quantitative part of the research, so ended up with some credits on there. Yeah.
So at the moment, I think we're getting true on all of these. This is going to be a difficult one for you. I understand you may have a famous author in your family. Is this true?
There's one he's blowing up right now, yeah. Now that I
Yes.
think about it.
For those of you listening and not watching, you will you may get that there's a link between Peter and Helmut that they may choose to elaborate on, but I'm not going to press them. You're married to a world-renowned World Health Organization campaigner for women's rights, I understand. Is this true?
Yes, the light of my life.
There you go. Well, I mean, aren't we
I
all
should
to
have
some
pled the
extent?
fifth on that one, then I would be in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't. And then finally, my final question is that apparently you frequently misplace things like your passport.
I plead the fifth on that one.
So seriously, Peter, thank you for being a good sport on that. But anything else that you'd like to share about who you are and how you come to be collaborating with us on our latest book?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can tie a little bit into this, my previous sports life, into then how I ended up in the corporate career and kind of the path that has taken me on so far. So basically, as you mentioned before, basically took sports quite seriously in my youth. Was basically the entirety of my, I would say, teens were spent practicing several hours a day. I lived in like the National Sports Academy in Austria, so for a large amount of my time was really focused on just becoming the best version of myself relating to tennis. And there was also the dream for a long time, I guess, to do this professionally. And when I was 13, 14, 15, I still envisioned myself having like a sports career and always being this field. But then basically at some point reality kicked in a little bit and I stopped growing at 16, which obviously in tennis, it's quite a bit of a disadvantage if all the other guys are like 6'1", 6'2", and you sit here 5'7", and yeah. And, the realist in me kicked in a little bit, and I knew it probably wasn't going to be enough to really make a living off it, at least as a professional player. But as you said before, like there was always already this curiosity about financial markets that kind of my grandfather had instilled on me. And this was also right around the time where the financial crisis hit, and you would read in the newspapers, yeah, this many billions vanished that day in the stock market. So that kind of piqued my curiosity at the time, and I thought, okay, so how can I connect kind of all this effort that I had put into sports with like a business career that at that point in my life seemed to be the more realistic and more interesting choice to me. So I ended up going to the US for college simply because this was a great way of kind of combining the effort that went into tennis with getting a decent education out of it and still seeing a little bit more of the world. So yeah, I ended up in the US, did my bachelor degree there in Georgia for 4 years, and then afterwards I had to come back to Austria kind of to do the military service. It's still mandatory there, and afterwards ended up in a trainee program at one of the big banks there, still not knowing 100% what I wanted to do. I was always like very keen on like some kind of risk-taking role. Trading was always kind of like the dream, but obviously those jobs are quite scarce, especially so in Austria, because that's not that much of the financial hub. But then I ended up growing through this rotation and actually did get one of the trading jobs of Erste Group, which is like one of the large Austrian banks. And yeah, kind of went from there. Have been in trading or risk-taking roles pretty much ever since. That took me kind of from Vienna to Geneva and now to Zurich. And now I finally ended up basically working for a large family office in a trading and portfolio management capacity there.
Fantastic.
Where I am.
Well, perhaps this is a nice bridge then to we feature storytelling as a component of these podcasts. And I know you've been thinking about what story that you might want to share.
Yeah, so it's not going to be a single story, I would say. It's more like a accumulation of things that happen over and over again. So short stories, so to say, that happen probably many times a year in the work life, but that I think is very, very intriguing that this seems to happen in every generation and seems to happen over and over again. And it actually, funnily, ties in a little bit into the intro where you were talking about when you were kids and the curiosity you had back then. So yeah, let me jump in. So basically, for me, it was very hard kind of making this transition from college to actual working life because I kind of studied a little bit more the hard science route. So I took a lot of like math classes, a lot of science classes in university. And kind of the thing that always gets drilled into you there is like coming to the correct answer, absolutely showing your thought process, like everything that you do, it needs to be kind of documented. It needs to be reproducible, etc., etc. So obviously then you start working life and you're a little bit overwhelmed because reality kicks in And even in like a finance role where there is vast amounts of data and there is the most sophisticated models that you can ever think of, it often turns out that there isn't really one true answer because you always have to act on so much incomplete information. And there is always, even if you have a super sophisticated model, there's still like human input into it. There is still uncertainty around it or assumptions that you have to take. And oftentimes these assumptions are actually the drastic thing. And for me, the funny thing is now that I'm a little bit longer in this field and I've built up a little bit kind of intuition about any kind of topic, that every time you see somebody enter this new field, kind of the approach that they seem to take is one of two extremes. You either have people that come in and that are basically think they are all knowledgeable, they know every single thing, and no other opinion can exist. Or you have people, and this happens more often than not from people that have the most impressive academic backgrounds, have super advanced degrees in hard sciences, that they actually are not willing to take any kind of decisions on incomplete information, and all the pragmatism that would be needed in order to actually get something done just isn't there at all. So kind of this golden middle thing, or I think this is the Voltaire saying, right? That perfect is the enemy of good. I think it is so true. Because really, I've seen so many projects drag on for years and years and years on end, with nothing ever going to production or nothing like tangible ever coming out of them, because people are 95% of the way there, and then they still want to figure out the last 5%. They want to be absolutely certain about it. But by the time you get to the point where you also cover that, something else has already changed in the world, and there has been progress made in some other field, that it's kind of like this rabbit wheel that you go down and it never gets finished. So yeah, for me, really, the kind of the thing that made me click is the first time I had a mentor then at work that was like, coming from finance again, this made it even more extreme because there's kind of large amounts of money at stake. And I think the first day I ever traded, I lost like, I don't know, 100,000 for the bank or something like this, and thought my career's over, don't have to come back the next day. And the guy was just like, yeah, seemed like a good choice at the time. Basically, he just gave him this confidence that was like, look, you need to do the best, or you need to take the best decision that you have at that point in time with the information that's given to you. But you're not always going to be right. You're going to be right more often than not. Great. But yeah, this confidence of basically being pragmatic about things and taking decisions even though you don't know everything. I think that's one of the things that clicked for me the most in my career.
Kenneth, there's one thing you said which really resonated with me. You said at university, there were so many things which gave you very good financial skills, but didn't prepare you really for the reality of the jobs. And I think that's one thing David and I have been pondering for a long time, that school, university does not really prepare you for life. Now, in a world where AI is going to be more and more important, this becomes, I think, even more apparent, because I think we're not prepared. None of our schools or colleges prepares us. What is a world with AI going to look like? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, we do use AI a fair bit in our current role as well, right? Because especially for coding or topics like this, it is extremely helpful. But I think that it's actually just going to reinforce the same issue where people, if they come out of university or out of a situation where they want one true firm answer, then I actually think AI is going to make this even worse, because they think now with the AI models in place, they can ask every question and they will receive the one true correct answer. But if you look at AI and you run maybe even the same question through several models, or you use the same prompt and give it slightly different tone, or tell it with the exact same question, okay, but assume X, Y, Z is true, you get vastly different answers, right? So I think, again, the willingness to interpret the possibility for many different answers to be true, or this willingness to kind of thrust your assumptions about the situation, even if they lead to vastly different outcomes in what AI in this case would suggest to you. I think that is something that's only going to get more and more and more.
Excellent. David,
I'm struck.
question.
struck again by your story, this idea of arrogance versus indecision, overconfidence versus doubt. I think we can all relatively easily picture the people that you're referring to. They're not exclusive to trading. They seem to exist in all walks of life. Sometimes I think the overconfidence is a badge. It's a facade. It's the sense that you can't show people that you're weak, that you've got to be able to demonstrate strength. In a way, showing indecision and is a vulnerability. It's more authentic, but it can create paralysis, I suppose. One of the things we talk about in Artificial Death of a Career, in all good booksellers on November the 4th, is about the idea of being overconfident in your career or getting to a point where you become a bit complacent, that you know it all. And sort of trying to bridge to the artificial intelligence conversation that we were just having, this seems like a real vulnerability. I wonder whether or not on the spectrum of doubt and indecision versus confidence and arrogance, that it's almost like the tortoise and the hare, that the hare is the overconfident, get results quickly, I'm the king or queen of the universe, and the tortoise is the I don't really know, I'm doubtful. Isn't it, in some ways, is it better to be the tortoise that's doubting and then grow into the confidence a little bit,
I think to be honest, I mean, this is also something that's probably very dependent on the field or the career that you choose, right? Because I mean, if you end up going something engineering like, then yeah, I mean, you probably have to err more of the silent caution. But in general, I think in most careers or in most situations in life, to be frank, because this isn't only like a career topic, right? I think I would always strive to be somewhere in the middle ground. Because this is one of the things where it's not, I don't know, it's hard for me to make a point of any of the two extremes being what you want to strive for, what is the better of the two evils in this case almost. Because, yeah, I've seen too many things go wrong when people went either of the two directions. It's either, yeah, they had a great idea, but then they wanted to complete it. We actually had something very funny happen like this once at work. Well, now looking back, it's funny. At the point in time, it was very much the opposite. But basically, when the Swiss franc, when that peg got lifted in 2015, there was this project going on before to kind of like reassess the risks, and people weren't happy with like the model and they wanted to fine tune it, etc., just to get like the best possible outcome should this ever happen, which nobody thought would happen anyway. And then, of course, the whole project took a little bit longer than expected, and January 15th happened, and that currency plunged 20%, which is completely unheard of for like a major market currency. And then all the research that went into this, because there was no decision taken, even though the project was 90% finished, basically vanished for nothing. And on the other hand, I've seen countless times where people, as you say, there was like a big major shift in market structure, and they still wanted to do what they have done for the last 15, 20 years because it always worked. I think it's either important that you find the middle ground for yourself, or at least there's a team or people around you that are the other side of the spectrum that you balance each other out. But I think really going one of the two extremes, it's going to lead to issues at some point or another.
I mean, you make a very good point. So you either find the middle ground yourself or a good balance yourself, or you have a team that helps you to do that. How do you personally find your middle ground? Or do you have magic tricks or an ingredient or like a recipe? What do you do if you know you have or should take a decision within a week?
I think, to be honest, I am very bad at finding the middle ground, but I think I'm quite self-aware that I am bad at it. And usually I'm actually more on the side of taking decisions too quickly. So what we have kind of structured, or how we've structured ourselves here at work, is that we have these weekly update meetings with the guy that's my boss, who's more on the other very, very, very extreme of like wanting to go through everything 100 times and covering all eventualities. And I think we both know that we are not good in terms of finding the middle ground if we would need to do this work by ourselves. But I think we do find a good balance with each other of like kind of coming to terms together, which ends up we both pull in different strings, but it ends up usually getting done in some kind of fashion that seems to work out decently well.
Sounds
Yeah,
a
I
bit
think
like you and me, David, doesn't it? Two ends of a spectrum.
Yes. So I'm the introvert and you're the extrovert. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Um, the how do you, Peter? How do you guard against when you're right too often in that situation where you go into your meeting with your colleague
Mhm.
that for the last 5 occasions you were right and he was overly cautious? Do you start to creep? Do you start to feel yourself emboldening and starting to listen less? How do you guard against that?
think think I was very prone to that in the past, and I believe I've only recently actually found a solution that, as simple as it sounds, really does wonders. And it was basically we just kept keeping a decision log for like the bigger decisions that we make jointly or even standalone, where we kind of rank our confidence in the topic, and then after the fact, once we kind of know the outcome, we also add in kind of the P&L. And in finance, this is fairly easy to measure, right? Because there's like, you can put a number on it. But if you start feeling kind of too confident, that's a big portion of humble pie, because you think, oh my God, I've done so great last year. And then you actually run the numbers and you look at how many decisions that you did were correct and how many were false. And in a year where you did really well, you look at this and you see like 60% correct. And I think that puts it into perspective very easily. I think doing something to track your decisions can be really helpful for that. And it also works the other way, right? Because you go through periods where you seem like nothing is going wrong in your life. Nothing is going right in your life, and you think you're doing the wrong thing over and over again. You start kind of doubting your intuition, which I think also is invaluable. The longer you work, like listening to your intuition is one of the key things I think in your career. But like you go through these stretches where you just think it's gone, and then having the other side of this and being able to look at all the good decisions and all the good kind of projects that you have done in the past, I think that's also very, very enlightening if you go through a rough patch, which we all do at some point. Yeah. I guess tracking your choices and tracking the outcomes, I think it can be very valuable.
Did you listen to Roger Federer's commencement speech that he did last year? He was I can't remember, was it Stanford or was it was one of the big US schools, but
Yeah.
he said to the audience, I won 20 odd Grand Slams. I had a 20 odd year career at the very top. Do you want to guess how many points I actually scored
Oh, I
percentage
have heard
wise over
about
my,
this. Yeah, and it's
yeah.
slightly over
It's
50% or something.
brilliant. It's
It's,
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
it was like 52% or something ridiculous. And so he lost 48%, and yet he won all that. So I suppose as a lesson of humility, that even the greatest sports, or one of the greatest sports people of the last, 50 years, actually only won 52%. But that was enough, right? At an elite sport level, that's what the difference was. But it I think is quite humbling to think that he lost 48% of his points. So that seemed to resonate given your tennis history and what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think in general, I think I mentioned this in the past as well. I think if you actually grow up doing some kind of athletic or some kind of competitive thing in your life, I think it also helps you with this whole concept of failing and taking failing as something positive and not like this evil thing that it's then sometimes portrayed in school, because in school, if you fail class, if you fail a test, it's really such a negative. But I think if you have more of an athletic background, this is really more like, okay, you're used to failing, you're used to making mistakes, figure out what went wrong and do it better next time, rather than really beating yourself up on it.
Just in this last section, as we draw to a conclusion here, bridging a little bit from this conversation to the conversation that everyone seems to be fearful at the moment of artificial intelligence. There's this sort of almost palpable sense that it's going to take many knowledge workers' jobs. I mean, trading isn't immune to this. The algorithms have always, to some extent, had a role, or I say always, certainly for the last 20 or 30 years, have had a role in putting positions on and managing risk. And so the question of how far artificial intelligence can go in disrupting the banking sector, all of the traditional sales stuff that we're talking about. There was a survey in the UK last year that said something like 60% of people are worried about losing their jobs in the next 12 months. The interesting thing I suppose I want to draw out and talk about your contribution to the book that we are about to push out there is, how do you guard against it? We talk about confidence, we talk about your example of, the two extremes of the arrogance of pretending you know everything and the indecision at the other end of the spectrum, and then trying to have middle ground. So being self-aware enough to know that you need to change, adapt, and continually move forward rather than stand still. This was a theme that we talked about with you when we interviewed you for the book. So I didn't know if you wanted to share a little bit about your thoughts about how one guards against complacency.
Honestly, I think mainly by curiosity. I mean, if you manage to choose a career, if you're lucky enough to follow a career that you are truly passionate about, and I think I've been lucky enough to kind of land in this field where I used to, as you mentioned before, watch the screens from my grandfather. What was this now? Probably 25 years ago. I think if you are curious and if you truly are interested in the subject matter, then you don't really get that complacent. Because if new tools like AI pop up, or even computing power in the past years have gotten so much more powerful, and data sets have become richer and richer and richer, right? Even if you think you know the things that you are currently doing, there is new possibilities of like analyzing the subject matter that pop up. And if you have this curiosity in you, you want to play around with the new tools. You want to see what doors AI opens up for you and how this can make yourself a better version of yourself. And in the end, I think a lot of what's happening now in finance with AI, yeah, it's going to make some jobs redundant, but it's going to, like, a lot more jobs are going to be created. And the main thing for me is, in the end, everything, even in finance, it still connects to like the human nature, right? And there is still like relationships that need to be formed, because the whole financial system, it still runs on credit, which in the end you need to trust the people you deal with there. And what the AI can do if you work in a field like this is it simply makes you a more efficient version of yourself and lets you do your job quicker. It lets you do your job better. It lets you explore things more efficiently. So yeah, for me, the complacency thing, it's really, if you're curious at what you're doing, it shouldn't be that much of an issue in my mind. Yeah. Being in a situation where you're not truly in love with your job, then I think that's very, very easy to do. And I have been there in the past where certain jobs or certain desks I was sitting on, they were getting a little bit, they weren't open for change or open for innovation, and you just had to do a routinely task. But then you can also do this privately, and use AI to kind of unlock a new skill set and then see where that can take you in the work life.
Can I ask you a question on that? You said, like, do something you're really passionate about. In
Mhm.
your case, it's rather easy. You're passionate about something which also earns you a very nice, comfortable living. What if your passion does not earn you a living? Would you still recommend that to people to follow their passion, or would you reconsider your position?
I think so. I would still say follow your passion. And I mean, look, this might be a situation where you still need to substitute your income then with something that you may not be that happy about, or where the hours kind of feel a little bit more empty. But if these empty hours then allow you to follow your passion the rest of the time, then that's probably still time well spent. Just wouldn't, like, look, I would rather do 10 hours in my day with something that I do not really enjoy, in order to then have 4 hours of something that truly kind of drives me in life, rather than doing the entire day of something that I feel pretty neutral about. But that's how I think about this.
Very wise, very wise. I think that was very well said. I would agree with that. And I think my key takeaway from this interview is basically it is so important, and that's pretty much our books as well. Yeah. It's so important to do the things you like to do, because that is really, at the end of the day, leads to happiness. Yeah. So I very much agree with that.
I was trying to prompt Helmut to ask his one question that he asks our guests towards the end of the podcast.
Okay, good. Shall I?
Now I'm
Go
curious.
ahead.
Can I
Okay,
still
no,
plead
it's
the
the same.
fifth?
No, it's the same question, really. If you had to give one advice to our audience, and much of our audience is actually probably people your age plus minus 5 years, what is the one career advice you would give people basically who listen to this podcast? I think you kind of did, but
Stay curious.
one advice, yeah?
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Yep, I think that's it.
That's a beautifully succinct response. So, Peter, thank you so much for entertaining us with your story. I think it resonates in multiple ways, and it's obviously a bridge to this discussion about personal reinvention, staying, as you say, curious, staying engaged in your professional life, something that does become more complex as we get a little bit older. Our family orbits become more complicated. They're a bit more dispersed. We get distracted by aging parents and grandparents and other things in life. When we're younger, they seem to be simpler and less complex. So managing this sort of set of planets in our lives that become more dispersed and more distant can create distractions. So staying curious, staying engaged, doing something you love is probably the right advice, but in the context of understanding that as we get older, that requires a certain effort. It's not something that necessarily happens all by itself. So this has been a great podcast. It's the first in a series of 4 podcasts that we're going to do that start to tee up the third book that we're launching, Artificial Death of a Career. Peter was very kind to contribute to that book, and we'll have 3 other guests that follow this podcast that also contributed to our work. But as I close this podcast, any final words from you, Peter?
No, I mean, I think I really enjoyed the discussion, and yeah, also kind of made me think back, reflect a little bit, or I will reflect a little bit more on it if I'm actually still doing all the things right now that I gave advice on. But yeah, that was very, very nice, and thank you.
Herr Schuster.
Yeah, I mean,
Final
just
words.
basically the spirit of transparency is Peter is family, so I've known him very well for a very, very long time. And the message he sent today, very consistent with the way I've experienced you over the years. And big takeaway for me is passion and curiosity. Also, this is very consistent. And the last thing is actually one of our next guests out of the 4 is born in the same place, comes from the same place where Peter comes from. And that's a small town in Austria called Bad Vöslau, and no more to be said. And then I just want to say servus und auf Wiedersehen to the next podcast.
Okay,
Alright.
so thanks everyone. The podcast series is now 6 months. We've been doing these podcasts. We have 12 now that have been out there. Thank you for following it. If you're interested in watching some of the previous podcasts, I'll put a link into the screen here. If you like the podcasts, I will say, and I may have said this once or twice before, I mean, if you like the podcast, I think you'll love the books. So I do think that you might want to check out the books if you haven't already. In addition to which, we're very active on social, both LinkedIn and Instagram. And our new website, which launched about a month ago, is, and I say this with complete detachment and no bias whatsoever, the best website of any couple of authors anywhere in the world. So thank you for listening. Thank you again to Peter. Thank you to my sparring partner, Helmut Schuster. We will now close this and talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Right.